Hi, this is Machiavelli, and you're watching The Esports Historian on Thorin's YouTube channel.
Right. What about? I always thought in the chronology of when the events went, I thought it was so cruel that like RAISY did beat you in that early Italian Open, because it's like from that moment on, you've just owned this guy's been in your back pocket the whole time, even though on paper, like I've even told him, even though it's so fucked up to have to say this to someone, but I'm still an honest person. I've told him what's mad is sometimes it did look like he was the best player in the world every day, except when he got to the Quakecon and had to play you. Like it feels like this guy. There's something about what's your take on it? I mean, give me the overall sense of who has RAISY been as a nemesis, a competitor, someone you've been a rival with?
I'll just say it from the get-go, from somebody who was not at the highest level in QuakeLive, who just kind of played it here and there, and who mostly played Counter-Strike. It is so impressive what he did. Even though he has like he's like the Buffalo Bills, unfortunately,
yes,
of Quake. But the fact that he was able to push himself and make it there that many times, and it's not as though he hasn't won some events here and there, just not the really big ones, that everybody hopes that he would do. He is one of the best I've ever played against. He is up there with us in terms of, when we've talked about like the top 4, the top 5.
Right.
He's up there now. He is within the discussion for sure, because yes, he didn't win, but to be able to get there 7 out of 10 times, that's...
To someone who's a casual, Rapha, I feel like a thing they can never understand if they weren't a competitor is I think fans sometimes view players almost as though they're static, like they're a character in the game. Like, oh, this guy is this good and he would beat this guy. But I have to want to tell them, dude, if you knew the human person, maybe like actually that guy had like a bad tournament. Maybe he's not feeling it. Maybe he didn't practice. I agree with you. It's the idea to return back and have a chance to win again that many times. That's bonkers, especially if you didn't win along the way, right?
I think the whole hypothetical question, like from earlier, like, just thinking about it now, I think at IEM Katowice, the first QPL event that I won, and what final was it? The stage 1 final of season 2, where we went the distance and played all 7 maps. Literally, if I did not exist within the scene, then he would potentially, from the shape that he was in at those 2 tournaments, nobody was better.
Right.
Nobody else but myself was better than him during those 2 events. It was actually kind of crazy at Katowice to literally watch him dismantle the other top like 4 or 5 people, like watching some of these matches. And then as we've seen throughout the years, like Kilson ended up having the better record against him.
Yes.
But if you go back and watch that game, I couldn't believe like how well RAISY played against Kilson at that event. It was phenomenal. And then trying to just think for myself, like, okay, well, this guy is in this type of shape, but I gotta somehow bring out my A+ game, and I gotta do it. But I think it's just part of it is the well-roundedness to my game, as far as like having to have been able to consistently beat him. There have been certain times in certain metas where he has stubbornly not played like 1 or 2 champs, and that's cost him in the draft. Like if you go back and you look at tournaments, like, and I could like break it down, I think that he's lost some tournaments due to bad drafting, where it's like if you had somebody that was doing the analytical work for him and told him what to pick, then he would probably have another win or 2 under
I think
his
that's
belt.
actually the theory Vanga, his mate, has. He actually thinks he should have been more cynical in the drafting aspect, and he was almost playing a bit too loosey-goosey, right? Yeah,
I agree, and because the problem too was there were some tournaments where I knew I was like, okay, he's not playing these 3 champions,
right.
So it's either going to be free for me to play, or he's forced to ban it, and then once he bans it, I'm going to take his like best champion or his next best champion,
right,
and I'm going to play it to force him to be on, the back foot, and it's definitely paid off for me a few times. I think you even look at like the recent Quakecon final. When we played in the upper bracket, we had crazy game on Molten where I played Scale and he played Nyx, and he's tried, and obviously I applaud him for trying to be able to play everything, but over like a year period he was trying to play Scale and he just couldn't really get it into his repertoire. Like you have to play it a bit more, kind of like how he plays and is so good with Clutch. Like you have to know the limits of what you can do. And so then in the grand final, because of how the match went before, he tried to take it from me instead.
Right.
It was one of those where it just wasn't at the level it needed to be able to beat me. And that happened like also at Iron Fist like 2 years before, where he attempted to do it then, and it was the same thing. It just wasn't up to the level enough to steal it from me to try to beat me. And I think if he would have focused more on working on those weaknesses with just what he needed to work on rather than perfecting what he was great at, then maybe he would be a champion still, regardless of me, having been in the scene and whatnot. But no, I told him at KeenCon, just in case, because of all the news last year with QPL stopping, I told him after the final, I said, I know you're probably pretty pissed right now. I said, but it's been an honor to play against you as many times as I had, and how good that you've gotten. And like, don't let people talk down to you. Like, don't. Like, I think everything that it takes to try to be a champion, like, you've put it out there for yourself. And as long as you tried your best at the end of the day, don't ever feel down about it, And yeah, obviously I'd love to play him again at some point in the final, but yeah, but I think it will be an asterisk next to him, regardless. Like, people will always look at that because,
of course,
yeah, because you have Kilson, Wenger, Cooler, and myself during that 3.5 years, well, 4 years really, where we were able to do it, and others did come close, but just not close enough.
I mean, I would say it this way. It's actually what I told him when I did my interview with him. When you look at the finals he lost to, like, Kilson and Wenger, I even told him, those are the ones where you just tip your hat, mate. You played great. They played awesome as well. And just in a shootout, they win. The ones against you, though, like you say, there's clearly, like, there was some sort of strategical edge or something. Along these lines, let me pivot like this. It seems like that's another aspect that actually has very much been in your wheelhouse in Quake Champions, which is the kind of player from QuakeLive who does just like to fire up a game and play off intuition and feel and what's fun. You are someone where, like, the strategic side of even the draft is like an element that never existed, obviously, before in Quake, and it feels like that's something that's played, like you say, you're actually actively thinking before you play people some of these aspects, whereas sometimes maybe they're just doing it a bit more, what am I good at today, what have I seen in the last game? Did you put a lot of hours into this aspect, the drafting element?
I put in a decent amount, but I think, like, it was going into, like, when Dewey made it into the QPL. Dewey is a huge baseball guy. He has lived and breathed baseball his whole life, so he's a stats guy. And he, on his own time, I think he went back for, like, the kickoff event, so 2019. Then I think he did, like, the first stage and maybe even the second stage. So going into the third stage, he had an entire stats thing lined up of who played what champs, how many times, who banned what maps, all this stuff. And we would talk in Theorycraft about this back and forth. And he just did it because he loved doing this stuff, right? But we did kind of figure out that, like, there was a pattern with players where if you picked certain champs on certain maps as your comfort pick as the first champ, it actually was prohibiting a lot of people from winning. They were losing games. It's like, so we started to figure out with the map pool, like, okay, if you're gonna be the one that picks first, you want to try to force these 2 or 3 maps. If you're going to be the one that counters, then you want it to be this map instead, because there's more options for you, because there's more flexibility on these maps, for example. And then, like a big thing was at that time, for some reason, Strog on Ruins of Sarnath had like an 80% win ratio when he was picked first.
Okay.
And I was like, well, that's just a no-brainer. So if it's the map and people want to play it against me and it's available, that's what I'm going to play. Like, and so he did that work for, like, probably a stage or two, but then eventually he kind of stopped. But I still, like, intuitively was looking out for it, like, through practice, through watching people, like, what did I think would work? And a big example was there was a time when Deep Embrace was entered into the pool, which has been a phenomenal map. Reminded me a lot of, like, Airwalk / Toxicity type of playstyle feel. And Keel was a big champ favorite for a while. But I kind of figured out first that he actually wasn't as good as people thought he was. And so I was playing him in practice, but I was also getting ready for, okay, I'm trying to bait people into picking him so that I play these 2 champions, which then I would purposely, like, I knew somebody would pick Deep Embrace against me. So then I would pick the next map where the champ that I'm going to counter Keel with they're really good with on that map, and now that's not available.
Right.
So
there's more layers to it than just the first one, right? I see. Right.
Yes. And it gets harder and harder to do that as like best of 5 goes on. But yeah, there's definitely mind games that go.
Just because I'm guessing by the time you get to map 5, like the flow chart's crazy as to what you could have been before the match began, right? That's the logic, right? Yeah,
exactly. And then the best of 5, there ends up coming a point sometimes, especially in the grand final. If you're the winner bracket winner, you kind of gotta on map 4 just choose like a 30-70 matchup.
Right.
It's like it's still possible, but you got to play pretty perfect because if you don't, there's this weird with how many maps it works and champs are left that it stops going from alternating to where one guy will get to counter and then insta pick.
Yes.
And there's not a lot of champs left, so they get 2 strong matchups right in a row.
Right.
You have to start strategizing for what's left at the end. Or unfortunately, you end up with what happened to RAISY against Quilson, and you're stuck with Keel on Ruins, who was not great at that tournament, and Sorlag against Keel on that map. Like, if you get down to Sorlag, he's never going to catch her. It's just not happening. And where it's one of those where he could have banned Keel instead earlier, or picked it on. There was like another map they were playing where he actually could have picked it then and been like, okay, it's going to be tough, but it's a little doable. But then the options at the end would have been much better if you end up going the distance. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of mind game stuff that goes into it.
Also sounds like it means essentially the thing people have to get out of the mindset of is in the old QuakeLive, each map is just each map. You just try and win each one.
Yeah.
And obviously there's no, in this scenario, like essentially there's almost like sweet spots within the game order, like you say. Like in this scenario, you could be losing, but if in the game 4 the person's fucked it up, you'll actually potentially get to game 5, right? I see.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like there's been, I've tried to be great at every map, but there's been maps where I think like if it's the first or second map in the series with more champs available, I'm super, super strong on it. Right. Whereas like if it's like a little bit later, I'm a bit less, but then there's other maps where like I really don't want to play people on like certain champs right away. But if it's later in the series and they're gone, then that map actually gets really strong for me because of how the matchups work then, etc. So it's just, and that's part of why I've really liked Quake Champions. It's so diverse in the play styles. Like even though you're playing the same maps, little factors change every time that you play the game. It's a little bit different every time, and I've really enjoyed that.
One thing I saw you said in an online written interview, actually, when you first came to Europe for Quake Champions, you said that you intentionally didn't try to keep playing against the same people or have like a specific practice, but you tried to just play almost everyone once, as it were, to get like a feel of the game. Is this something you only did that one time? Have you done that as a general approach? Is it something to do with your thing and how you practice?
I've continued to do that, and a lot of it was a big lesson learned from my first international tournament at ESWC Masters of Paris in 2008. I boot camped with 04 in San Diego for it was like 7 to 10 days before the event, and then we went. And so primarily I played just him on LAN, and unfortunately I learned for myself that if I'm playing the same player over and over, that eventually you start developing habits to just beat this playstyle.
Right.
Because like you've stated in other stuff, like when you play somebody again, like the amount of times that I've played Cypher over the years, each matchup is a little different because we're thinking about certain things that happened the previous time that we played, and we are changing things up a little bit, right? So you're trying to adapt to that. But if you keep playing the one playstyle over and over, then sometimes you get caught off guard by stuff that you should never be caught off guard by because you're habitually getting into these bad patterns. So that's why, and and before the first IEM final, Cooler and I were boot camping for, I think, like 5 days in Cologne before the event. And he was getting pissed at me because I refused to play him more than it was 2 or 3 sets in the... Even though we could make a LAN server for ourselves and play, but then I would be like, nope, I need to play other people. And he would just be like, for him, he needed to be playing in that mindset. He wanted to play for LAN, but I'm playing for the bigger picture of playing different play styles and trying to be ready for everything. And I was like, at that time, I hadn't played him in a final yet, and he was still that, that player that I had looked up to and stuff. And I was like, well, at this point, I can't really care if I pissed him off or not.
No,
I know what faulted me in the past, and I'm not going to repeat that same mistake. And over the years, it's the same thing. I've always tried to play different play styles and mix it up. I feel that it's been best for me.
So if you'd have gotten sucked into his game and played him like 5 straight days, he might have actually won that final, essentially, right?
That's possible.
Right. Okay. Okay. What about, obviously one of the things that I actually think is one of the, even though I know in the Quake Pro League, the downside of the stages is, even though to me they were dope, it was like Formula One or something, or like some sort of sport where you have like a lower sized thing and then you have the big final. Like, to me, as long as the players are there, it's just Quake to me. And so a lot of people might forget this, but I actually do think winning that Quake stage with 0 map losses, that might actually be one of the best feats in the history of Quake, because you weren't playing bombs, right? They was the best players in the world as well. Like, do you hold that high up yourself, even though it's not a Quakecon or something? Do you also hold it as a big feat?
Yeah, it was, I think, the first time I ever did it internationally. It took all those years to be able to do it, which I think also shows just how difficult it is to accomplish that. It'd actually be nice to look back and see like who else has been able to do it. I'm sure there's probably a Quake 4 event or two where Toxic probably won everything. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see if Cypher was ever able to do it, or if he dropped a map, like one map here or something like that. Like,
it feels like there would be very few though, Rapha, just from the sense that like actually when someone's dominant, usually the fact that you can sort of like lose a map also can psychologically help you sometimes. I've always felt like a lot of players, they don't mind losing one as long as they know they're going to win the series, as it were, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like to keep the focus, got to be very few have ever done that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's, probably pretty few. But yeah, hopefully somebody can put in the comments later. Somebody will do the research and figure it out.
Sure. What about, let me think how to phrase this question. Right, obviously, I should actually have asked you what was before the interview, but whatever, we can edit this if not. So you told me what you're comfortable talking about here. Obviously, in 2020, you had a very difficult personal tragedy happen to you, and it was around the time where, if people remember, you actually had already been winning at this point. You were winning like earlier in the year. Then I think the stage before that, you like maybe came third or something. There's the one we had like a little drop down. You're still one of the top players though, right? In this situation, I don't know how much you want to say, but I would just say this aspect. The question I had is quite pointed. It's like this. I've actually known some other people, because I just know so many people in different esports games who've also had similar, obviously can never be identical, but they've had things like a parent pass away a month before a tournament, or sometimes even days before, and they just decided, I'm going to go to the tournament anyway. And some of them have told me that sometimes it'd be counterintuitive. Like some of them told me, it wasn't like they said, I actually don't think I'm like heroic for doing this, because actually, if anything, I'm the kind of person where that's my escape. You know, when I actually played the game, if anything, I took my mind off it, and it meant I didn't think about those things. I just want to know, in your situation, is there something similar for you? Like, because in that situation, like I don't think anyone would blame you if you just took 6 months off, mate. If you just said, forget about the tournament, like no one would have anything to say. What would you say about this?
It's hard to answer. I think continuing to, I did take probably 2 to 3 weeks off, but I decided to continue to play, and I really pushed myself to win that event in her memory. And I think it was, to be honest, it was a really healthy thing for me to do. It allowed me to first grow as a person in terms of how to healthily try to handle all of the pain and anger like that was going on at that time, and to try to funnel that into something positive. Because otherwise, without some outlet to do that, I probably would have been, in a pretty bad place for quite a long time, but I can definitely see where some people look at it, like you're saying, that they felt like maybe for them it was selfish or something, but it's not as though I wasn't not grieving. I was all the time, but I wanted to try to do something really positive. And like I said, it really reminded me of the first Quakecon win that I really pushed myself to win for my dad's remembrance. But yeah, I really tried to push and do so for her. And to be honest, it was such a weird situation at that time too, because of COVID and everything going on. Sure. But I don't know if everybody knows this, but because it was going to be played online, it wasn't only just for myself. I wanted, because of how the game works and it tries to find like a median feel for both players, and I was going to have to play international matches, I literally drove because like flying at that time was dangerous.
Oh, sure.
Like contracting the virus and stuff, right? And this is before vaccines had come out, right? So I drove myself all the way from Dallas to Boston, which is a 30-hour trip.
Hell, okay.
Okay. So I drove there to get there like 4 days before the event. DeHang decided to join me. And I think if it wasn't for him being there, I probably wouldn't have held it together. And I'm really appreciative that he showed up. But we were there playing in, at that time, a safe environment. We went into the LAN center and there was a secured booth where you would have like maybe 5 or 6 computers, but we're the only 2 in there. And so it made the ping conditions better for myself and for the Europeans for like the intercontinental play, so that the game would feel more fair. And yeah, and I was like, I'm gonna give everything that I can to make this happen and accept nothing less, it's obviously, it's tough to talk about, but it is one of the most memorable wins I've ever had, for better or for worse. It's very, very bittersweet.
Because I feel as though on a topic like that, Rapha, it is actually a bit easy for people to think cynically things like if people even think of that storyline, they could imagine it like a movie. And in the movie, if you go to the tunnel, of course you'd win because that'd be the great storyline, right? But I actually think the really brave thing you did was dare to compete. Well, what if you'd lost? Like, obviously it doesn't bear thinking about, but in that scenario, if that emotional state, that in itself might have been painful, right? So I do think, actually, I think this is why I put it at this point in the interview. I think that's another feat of yours, which even though it's a strange outside of the game thing we wish didn't exist, it is a very impressive feat that you accomplished, I think.
Thank you. I don't know what to say other than thank you for the kind words.
No, I appreciate you talking about it, mate. Like I said, I know it's a sensitive topic, right? What about here's a good tangent, right? Obviously, when we had this online period, which lasted years and years, especially in Quake, where people had to just play this what would have been LANs, but they were online now, and everyone's in their home. Actually, I know a lot of players where I feel like a lot of people thought about quitting, mate. A lot of people thought like, this is boring. Like, who wants to just like half the thrill? And everyone I talk to says the same thing. Half the thrill is even the ritual of going to an event and meeting people, and then sometimes you go out early and you're thinking about the next event when you get home. Sometimes you do well and you get all the awesome experience of those. I've heard everyone told me it's not the same in the online game. When you exit the game when you won the match, even if you won Quakecon, but you're just in your bedroom and you go for a drink, it's not the same as winning Quakecon, is it? It's why, for example, spoiler, like people like Vonga are sort of like, well, I did win Quakecon, but did I win Quakecon? They even say, like, I'd rather obviously won the LAN one, right? Were you someone who could handle this, like, grind of online and the uncertainty of not knowing when LANs would come? Were you able to lock in?
I think part of it was because of how I approached it mentally, in the sense of looking at the big picture of esports in general at that time. First of all, the netcode for the game was... Yes, we complain about it, but overall, it's probably the best netcode I've ever played with in terms of playing, cross-continental for NA and EU. It literally is. Like, if the netcode was not that way, we would not have been able to play the way we did during COVID. Right. And I don't even know, because you look at other esports at that time, there were quite a few that shut down because they couldn't meet at LAN events and the netcode is terrible. And I mean, you even had to see it where, like, at that time in the fighting game industry, like for people making those games, they were kind of forced their hand to actually improve their netcodes going forward in case things had to, stay that way, right? So I looked at it like, you know what, I'm just really thankful we're continuing to get to play. We get to play in something that, yes, it's a bit shit to die around a corner here or there sometimes, but overall, it's possible. It's playable. It's doable. You can, even though you have the high ping, you can still win sometimes. It's not as though it's like a death sentence to you, right? And as well, it also helps that for some reason, the game was actually running pretty smooth for like 2019 to like early 2021. But then the game, I think it started to have some problems because of the engine, whereas like computers started coming out that could really push the frames at that time. And until the Romanian LAN that Kilson won, people just thought it was probably online stuff. It's just something's wrong with the netcode or people's connections are causing problems. Where no, high frame rate was really fucking the game up. Like, so it was like, especially frame rates of like 500 plus were sometimes giving like people random bursts of faster fire rate with LG and machine gun.
Right.
So yeah, so there were times where you would just take 150 damage in half a second and be like, what the fuck just happened to me, right? But you can't control it.
Sure.
Right? So, and then also during that period, not everybody could push their computer to that limit, right? So the faster that and better that video cards were getting, and especially I think RAM, because the game is very processor and RAM dependent, and the faster that RAM speeds were going, and you started seeing like people playing on different RAM sets, you could just feel it in the game, and that's why some people when I comment on it, they're like, "Oh, you're just complaining," blah blah. It's like, well, what you're getting to see is only at 60 FPS on the stream compared to what you're actually playing with in front of you.
I see, right.
That's why once we actually got to see, it's still happening on LAN, where like sometimes for some reason the game would get desynced and you go to fire a rail and all of a sudden the enemy's model is updated over here. So there's no way you would ever hit him unless you like know that you have to lead when usually you don't, and certain things like that would happen. So that's when I think definitely not just myself, but other players were complaining a bit more like during that time period, because the game was just getting so much more inconsistent to play, and it just exacerbated the ping problem. Whereas you definitely could tell once they last year, it was like I think like a couple months into the season, they limited the frame rate instead of leaving it uncapped, and the games got much more consistent. And that whole like desynced problem of having players with like 50% LG and 70 rail to somebody who's not even hitting 25% as a professional weren't happening as often as all. So it really made the game feel a bit more consistent. So yeah, and I think if that problem wouldn't have been there, then who knows? Like it probably maybe would have been smooth sailing through there. But it definitely was a different version of the game compared to what we were playing on for like 2 years because of just engine problems in itself.
Being as obviously over your career, like I said in the earlier point about the small sample size of how many great players there are in Quake and how they cycle through, etc. Obviously, we've talked about a lot of the classic ones from QuakeLive that were your nemesis for over the many years. So let me ask about some of the other people from Quake Champions specifically. So I want to actually know what your take is on clawz, because this is another guy where, I don't know what it is about like Belarusian Quake players. They just all seem to have this thing where on the one hand, you notice they always come with some cracked like mechanical skill, but then they also have this weird mercurial thing to their personality where it's like when they care, they're really good. And then there's times where you're like, are you even playing the game? And they're like, actually, I'm playing Apex Legends. I'm like, what? Like, and then even though you're like the best player in Quake, so they're just unusual people. So who has clawz been? Because he's somewhere where like I can't tell. Is it that he lost interest? Could he have been on top for the best? Who is this guy to you?
I think part of it was he was really motivated in the beginning because he was young. He hadn't had a chance to prove himself yet. The first time I ever met him was the Tri Damage tournament where it was like TDM, CTF, and Duel in 2015.
Right.
He showed up and played with Cypher, Strengths, and I think it was Silent Sep or Draven. I can't remember which, but one of those two. And he was only like 15 or 16 at the time. But you could tell this kid had something special. And he was starting to prove himself in online cups. And I think in Quake Champions at the beginning, he really flourished due to his mechanics. And he wasn't afraid to take the game for what it was, I think. Where you had some like older players try to play it more like QuakeLive or the Quakes played. Where it's like, look, some things from there will work here, but not everything. It's a new game. Like you can't allow yourself to get stuck in that mindset. And I don't think he allowed himself to. Like he was willing to experiment more and be more expressive. And it's obviously such a huge thing for him to win everything at the first event. It's such an accomplishment. And then yes, it was a weird tournament the next year with the best of one, but he did win. He's won two. He's got 2 Quakecons under his belt in terms of duels, man. So it's not as though the kid couldn't play. Like he was really, really good. I do think because there was a brief time he did try to come back a little bit for time limit duel, and I think for him, my guess was the amount of time he would have needed to put in to catch up to people, he didn't feel was worth it and didn't want to do it. it's not as though he couldn't potentially do it, but I think round duel favored his play style a little bit more. But he was definitely a problem for a lot of players. Oddly enough, he's another, like, if you go back and look at the win-loss record, I have a really good win-loss record against him, even though, like, we never met in a final, really, except for 2v2 stuff. But yeah, he was one of those players where if he ran into me in a tournament, it seemed my style was really hard for him to overcome. Whereas if the brackets would have been a little bit different, there could have been more finals that he was in. Because, I mean, he was coming off of, the World Championship win, and then he went to DreamHack Winter 2017, and we actually were in the same group. And I managed to beat him there, and then I can't remember where he placed, but he had an off tournament in terms of duel there, and then they didn't place as well as they wanted in Sacrifice. They got third, I think. Yeah, because we played was it Noctis, Tox, Faz, and Too Good in the finals that year. But then you saw, like, once the mode changed to 2v2, he seemed really motivated again for the next year, and you saw the best come back out of him again. I think he's just one of those that he needs something fresh and something new, because then the same happened in Apex. When it was the beginning, he was placing near the top consistently for the first year. He was a phenomenal player.
Right.
And then I think he just kind of lost the edge to want to maintain that. And then you saw, like, a drop in results. So, and what's funny enough is he's young enough that, like, if a new game comes out now that he gets motivated for, dude, I think he could become a champion again. It's just, he's just one of those players, like you said, it's like, is he feeling like he's motivated enough to do it or not? Because, you see it in sports sometimes. Sometimes a team or a player, depending on what it is, they reach the top once, and for them, they're satisfied. That's enough. For others, they are chasing, records or their own ghost, essentially. They're trying to set something apart from everybody else, and they can do that mentally. They're strong enough to do that. But some people, they've done it once, they've proved it, and they're content with it. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that.
No. Yeah.
It's just the way it is. Yeah.
I mean, I would segue and ask a follow-on question, which is, I'll tie it together. Like I said about RAISY earlier, on the one hand, I find it incredibly impressive that he could lose, pick himself up and go, right, I guess next year has to be my best year. Then go back to the grind, get back there and lose again. I think that is incredible. I think there's very few humans who, if they kept losing, would do that. In fact, I tell you from knowing esports people, a lot of them would just start to, morale would go down, or you just wouldn't believe it was possible. But then similarly, as you say, there's been plenty of people where they've had a championship early and then it sort of sated them a little bit. Maybe they didn't have the same hunger. I would actually say, in some sense, that's actually another thing I found quite impressive about your career is, even though you've won many, many times, again, to a casual fan, they might think if you've won, well, of course it's going to be fun. You're going to want to do it again. No, because then there's the element of, like, it's a slog to get to the top again. I mean, sometimes you're not even on top if it's a new game. I'd even add in as well, if you keep playing, eventually you won't be on top, and then some might even imply, like, you should have quit on top, like Michael Jordan could have after that Bulls jazz check. Some people also don't want to risk the legacy, as it were. So what is it you would say in you? How are you able to simultaneously keep going, but then also somehow it's like winning doesn't ever fully sate you? So you're able to sort of do the reset somehow? How do you do that?
I think with friends and stuff, I'm a very, very competitive person, but with friends, I'm not the, like, toxic competitive person. Right. But when it comes to, like, competing in esports and whatnot, and just watching sports in general or other esports, I just love competition. And like I said before, I'm just so thankful I've been able to get to do something that I love, and I have not taken that for granted, because I know, like, at some point it will end. Like, my playing days will end, and I don't want to have any regrets with that.
Sure.
Like, at some point the skill will drop off enough that it's like it is time to hang it up. But until then, I'm going to give it everything that I've got, and I'm going to have no regrets with it. And as well, like, I think, look at I've had to take, like, a grain of salt with some tournament results, but for the most part, it's always shooting to make the final and to give yourself a chance to win, right? Because I've never understood the mentality of, I'd rather finish third than lose the final. To me, what the fuck? Excuse my French, but it's like, you want to have the chance to be the champion. You want to be able to all the work that everybody puts in yourself, like you owe it to yourself to go for it. And if you lose at the end, like you can learn from it. It's okay. Like
the thing is, though, mate, I feel like you are tapping into something. You've mentioned it earlier in this interview. Isn't one of the key problems? Like a lot of people, even who are great players and competitors, because it's painful to lose. I think some of them are sort of pain adverse, as it were. Like you say, they'd rather come third and go, "I didn't lose the final." Whereas you've made it very clear you're not afraid to lose, right? You're willing to put it out there and lose.
Yeah, and I think this goes actually back to a good lesson and he'll say that he has no real involvement with it, but he does. Carmack, who has helped run ESL and who worked for, SK back when we were there as well. A good movie that he had me watch before the first IEM finals, because he noticed a little change in my personality and was like, I think you should watch this film. And he had me watch The Hustler.
Oh, and right. Okay.
The main message of that movie is that there are so many champions in this world. There are so many people that actually have the potential to do it, but sabotage themselves. And it's people that are champions that having a pity party for themselves on the inside, who set up excuses prematurely, whether they realize it or not, subconsciously, so that if they fail, it doesn't hurt as bad.
Right.
Like the whole, like, what was the quote in the movie? It's like, yeah, everybody's a champion at making excuses for themselves,
right,
at feeling sorry for themselves. In the whole like turn of the movie of him realizing the reason he was losing to Minnesota Fats is because he wasn't doing everything in his power to be at his best the whole time. He was leaving it so that if he lost, there's always an excuse for it. I've always looked, there is no shame in giving it everything you've got. I think everybody should be doing that. It's like that's the thing. Like you shouldn't be living with the regret of not trying your hardest. Every now and then, like it's happened to me. It's not always going to work out, but you should try your best to make it happen. I really appreciate him for for noticing that and just saying, hey, I think you should watch it and take some perspective on it. And it's really meant a lot, and I've taken it to heart, ever since then.
I would say as a follow-up on the same topic, that's actually even something I think people do with their careers in general, Rapha. I actually do think some of the people who had times where I wasn't motivated or the patch was bullshit or whatever, it's at the end of their career, they might think that they can go, well, we'll never know. Maybe I would have won this, that, the other. But I actually think it's the other way around. I actually think, like you're saying, I think they end up haunted by regret. Whereas you referenced Peyton Manning, it's perfectly, his career. Mm-hmm. I actually thought one of the most insightful things he said in his retirement speech was he had a quote that he began it with where it was something like, once you've exhausted an experience, you can't help but revere it. And what he explained was that, like, look, if you're a fan of Peyton Manning, I am as well, obviously what you do is you go, well, he never had the defense as Tom Brady did, and he didn't have all the same pieces, and he should have won way more Super Bowls. That's as a fan. What's cool is I've noticed I've never heard him complain like that ever, mate. I actually feel like because he knows he put in like infinite practice and film session, he's able to just live with the results. He can sort of just say, right, whatever happened. And the best thing is I don't have to worry, could I have done X, Y, and Z? I tried it. I did X, Y, and Z. It just came with these results. Have you felt something similar for yourself?
Yeah, I really have. Because, like I said, I've taken that approach and, with like leading up to tournaments, with practice, preparation, and I've had to have, some learning over the years. I've made some mistakes in some of those regards, but it's about like trying to set yourself up for success. You owe it. And it starts in the practice session. Like I look at it like when we're there for the 2 hours that I'm playing somebody or whatever, I don't just owe it to myself. I owe it to them to give them my 100% regardless. Even if I'm like testing things.
You try hard against randoms online. If I watch you on your stream, it seems that you play properly, right?
Yeah, I try to find ways to make the practice, even if they're not like good enough to beat me necessarily. I try to find ways to make the practice meaningful so that it just helps either keep my shape up or maybe I can test something, right? But I just want to lead by example because I hate it when somebody comes to practice and then they quit early, and they waste my time, because then it's not that easy all the time to then just go try to find somebody else because then everything else is booked, right? And I try to be forgiving about it and understanding okay, maybe they're having a bad day or whatever, but I try to do my best to make sure that they don't have to feel that from my end, so that when they know they're guaranteed to get that from me. And I've just always put that out there, regardless of whether it's team stuff, whether it's it's duel. That's the way that I've tried to hold myself accountable, essentially.
By the way, this is another question where I'm inserting a moment here where, if necessary, I can potentially edit it. Because I just thought, this one I genuinely have no clue about. I saw in an interview, you said that for the Quakecon 2021, so crucially 2021, you said there was some circumstances that prevent you from playing. Have you ever revealed what that is?
No, actually, because first of all, I don't think that it takes away from anybody's performance. It's just I was lucky enough to even be able to finish playing that tournament because I had tried to do the same thing in terms of go east and to get the ping to be lower and to play. I was playing from DC this time. There's an affiliate that works through Liquid and other stuff, and I was playing from there. And everything was going fine, but then and unfortunately I had already caught COVID 2 times within the last year and a half. I caught it right at the beginning of 2020 and then near the end of 2020. And I had been doing everything that I should, staying the fuck away from people, trying to just make sure okay, if I get sick after the tournament, whatever. And I had gone to eat and I was on my way back to the hotel. And I was on the phone with my mom, oddly enough. I was up, just talking to her, catching up. And this homeless person came up out of the side. I didn't see them. And they got right up in my face. And funnily enough, it was just to talk to me about my shoes.
Oh, right. Okay. It wasn't anything weird. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And, but sure enough, later that evening, going into the next morning, I was like, I know what this feels like. And where I was staying was where I was playing actually was where everybody was located for the Wizards NBA 2K team and stuff.
Oh, right. Okay.
And they literally that day before had that night they left to go to some tournament in Dallas, oddly enough. So we swapped places. So the only person that would be at the office was me. There would be nobody else. So I was like, well, I'm sick as a dog, but I'm the only one there. So I can actually still go and not be in contact with anybody and still play. And it was really, really rough to play through, but I did it. But if they hadn't had to leave, I would have had to drop out of the tournament.
Right.
I wouldn't have put myself there if anybody was still there. I would have made sure, just would have been tough shit. And I would have dropped out of the tournament. I think at that time, probably top 8, top 6, 16. Something like that. But yeah, literally the only reason I got to keep playing is because they had left, right before that evening that I had gotten sick and everything. And luckily everything turned out fine for them because they had to be, when they went, they had to get tested as they went. And then throughout their whole event, nobody got sick for where they were, thankfully.
Perfect.
Right. So but it was, I was really, really close to having to just drop out. And so playing, especially the grueling losers bracket run that I had, and pushing myself through how I was feeling, I gave it everything, and finishing third the way that I did, I rarely am content with finishing less than first, but I was happy with the fact that I gave it my all despite all of that stuff, and I finished pretty well. You know what I mean? Given the circumstances, and I could live with that. So,
right, when you won the last QuakeCon, was it actually known at the time it could be the last one? Was there even any sense in the scene at the time?
Nope. We had no idea. I mean, I had you could say hindsight's 2020. I had kind of a gut feeling at the event. There are certain things and maybe certain conversation or whatever that when you think back on, you're like, oh, maybe, subconsciously somebody was saying something, blah, blah, blah. But I just had this mindset of the moment because, first of all, it was really special for us all to be back. It had been 4 years. Yeah. We were back at QuakeCon to play the finals. And the last one was already super special for Kilson to get his first win. And then I was just like, I just want to take advantage of everything that this is right now and just appreciate the moment. Just live in the moment and just appreciate everything for what it is. And just give it my all and try to win this thing. And and looking at it now that it's over, I'm really glad that I was able to win officially, like the last event for it. Obviously, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish it would have kept going, but yeah, it's not, for the QuakeLive era, for the last tournament for that, and then for the QPL era, I'm really glad that I dug deep and played at my very best when it ended up mattering the most at the end. And it's that I left nothing unchecked and finished those essential, storylines as best as I possibly could. And it really made me appreciative of, just, and I think it was with, and I took the esports award thing with a grain of salt last year, because I felt like it wasn't just an award for myself, because I've always looked at it like it's for the whole Quake scene in general, because of how niche we've been.
Sure.
But as well as my wins don't mean anything without how good everybody else is.
Oh, for sure.
It just doesn't. All of the wins that I've ever had are special because of who I've had to go against to get there, with the circumstances that we've played to get there, etc. I mean, you look at the stuff that I had to go through, like for some of the QPL wins at that time, right? But also, like, I'm really proud that Kilson was able to win his second one. A lot of people have kind of forgotten he was having some serious eye trouble. Like, he had to have eye surgery and stuff like that, like where, if it didn't go right, like he could potentially go blind in one eye, like, but it worked out. And so he was kind of playing handicapped for like a little bit, and he was able to come back and give it his best, and he was able to do it again. And I think, as he said it before, it is really, really hard, I think, just mentally, emotionally, to push yourself to your limit and win back to back. It really is. Like, and I think that's also why him and I haven't really played in finals throughout the QPL. Yeah. We've played each other on the way, and it's the same with Cypher. Like, we didn't always play each other in the final either. Like, for QuakeCons, we never did. For the other events, we did. But it's so hard to do that and be at your very best again and again and again. And yeah, and I think that's why. Also, you look at Wenger, like the situation with his
his dad,
going on. Yeah. So, and I just, really appreciative of everybody that I played against during this era, like what they were able to do.
I think it speaks to everyone's character, right? This is kind of like defining stuff, yeah. Yeah,
and obviously, certain players being, excluded from the league for a while due to, obvious reasons. But, obviously I still have great love for them and all the years that I've competed against them. Like, I wouldn't be the person that I am today without them, challenging me to be better, version of myself, not just inside the game, but outside. And I'll always appreciate the friendships years down the line. And hopefully, this sounds like a wrap up answer, but yeah, I don't mind talking a bit more. But I want to see Quake in some aspect, even if it's years down the line. I want to see something like it continue. I want to see a new generation come up like Cypher, Avik, and I did.
Sure.
Even looking at Strong Sage, how fast that he came up within a year and a half potential. Like, if more competitions kept going, what could he have done?
There is a what if. Yeah. Think about all those, but Maxter, all those guys who never even got to compete till the end. Yeah, exactly.
Like, Maxter's reminds me a lot of Cypher. Like, he really does in terms of his play style and what he can do, and he has that magic about him. And very few people have that. And I want to be able to see it at some point, whether I can commentate on it or just appreciate it from afar. Like, I want to see it at some point, the storyline of the Quake lineage, essentially the Arena FPS lineage, continue.
Everyone needs a support network, and mine is, of course, my Patreon community, the Scrominati, who in many ways, they're the Sonny to my Cher, saying, I got you, babe. So this video and all the others on my channel were kindly supported by the following names: Ahmed Hadju, Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Adam Tomlin, Animosity, Jensen Go, Tosh, Toucan, and you know it. Jerky's Minion, my main man, always going to be referenced, one of the best patrons of all time. Would you like to ask a question in my AMA? Maybe you want to suggest a topic or a guest to say on my channel? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming Reflections and Talk to Thorin interviews are. Maybe you want to do one of those long discussions where you get to set the topics we talk about. Well, if any of these or others appeal to you, put your money where your mouth is. Join the Skullluminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.